Have you ever noticed how quickly your mind can create a worst case scenario? Something hasn't even happened yet, and somehow you've already imagined the rejection, conversation going badly, the opportunity falling through, the relationship ending, the thing you're excited about somehow being taken away. None of it has happened yet, and we're rehearsing something bad happening in our minds. Sometimes we don't even recognize that we're doing this because we've learned to call this being realistic. We say things like, I just don't want to get my hopes up. I'd rather prepare myself. I don't want to be disappointed. And on the surface, this can sound like wisdom. This can sound like knowing. But what it really is expecting the worst to happen when it hasn't even happened yet. And what if expecting the worst isn't actually preparing you for this pain? What if it's causing it? It's causing you to experience the pain that you um, haven't even come into contact with yet. And in fact, I can go as far as to say it's causing and creating a pain instead of preparing you for the anticipation of one. And so, somewhere along the way in our lives, we have learned that expecting disappointment is safer than allowing ourselves to have hope. And, you know, today I want to talk about why we do this, what it actually costs us, and how we can begin moving out of this pattern, not through toxic positivity and telling yourself everything will be okay, or pretending it's going to work out exactly as you imagined in the way that you want, but through awareness, presence, and a deeper trust in God. Let's talk about why we rehearse pain. Our minds are constantly trying to predict what comes next. We are hardwired for safety. And when we've experienced disappointment, rejection, betrayal, instability, or loss, which all of us have, our past experiences naturally influence those predictions. Something happens enough times, and a part of us starts to say, I've seen this before. I know where this is going. Don't get too excited. Protect yourself. And I think this is where something really interesting happens. We begin to confuse our prediction for the truth. We don't actually know what's going to happen. Our bodies begin to respond as though we are afraid of something that's already happening. We react as if it's happened already, even though it's somewhere projected in the future. Think about how often we do this. We rehearse conversations that haven't even happened yet. We play out arguments in our mind that haven't even occurred. We anticipate rejection that we haven't even stepped forward to connect to others with, and failure that hasn't even happened yet, loss that hasn't happened. We can spend our entire afternoons emotionally responding to this future that doesn't exist, that only exists in our mind. And the irony of this all is that we're usually doing it because some part of us thinks if I prepare for the pain now, somehow it won't hurt as much later. But does this actually work? If something eventually does happen that is painful, worrying about it for 3 weeks beforehand doesn't necessarily make the pain easier. It just means we suffered for 3 weeks before we ever needed to. And if the thing doesn't happen, then we suffered over reality that never existed at all. Why does fear become familiar? This is where I think healing becomes much deeper than simply thinking positively, because our fears become so familiar and so part of our normal everyday life that we lack the awareness sometimes to even question the way we're operating in our life. We become so accustomed to waiting for something to go wrong that it starts to feel normal, right? And the opposite of that, having peace and patience, starts to feel uncomfortable. And things might be going well, and maybe you're having opportunities, you're building new connections, um, but somewhere deep and behind in your mind, you're thinking, when is everything going to go wrong? Something might happen. This will all be taken away. And instead of allowing yourself to feel excited and content and grateful and just full of love and joy, your mind starts looking for all the reasons how this will be taken away, how this is not truly your life, how you don't deserve any of this. And you finally you're finally in this season of peace, and instead of resting in it, instead of accepting it, instead of enjoying your arrival, you subconsciously, unconsciously, and maybe sometimes even consciously think to yourself, something bad is coming. Something bad must happen now because I've made it. And when you've lived this way for long enough, you may not again recognize this as fear. It just feels normal to think this way. And but there's a cost to constantly preparing yourself for a disappointment. I know because I've also been there. I lived so much of my life where I was pushing myself in personal development in all my goals and all the expectations I had for myself to achieve and accomplish. And I had reached that goal, right? I was getting married to my dream partner. I was going to have a baby. I moved out with my partner. We got married, and I had a job that I loved. All the things that I thought would make my life peaceful somehow. And yet, in the back of my mind, subconsciously, I was rehearsing how it would all come crashing down. And I thought, wow, things are so good right now. Something bad might is probably going to happen next, right? Or has to happen next. And sure enough, after that, COVID happened. And then my baby was born extremely premature at 23 weeks. And so part of my healing journey throughout this process was unlearning that fight or flight, or fawn, freeze response that was so deeply ingrained in myself because of my all of my years prior to that happening. Right, it had just come to a point where I couldn't escape that anymore, and it became so obvious that the way that I was thinking, feeling, behaving wasn't right. And so, um, when you're constantly preparing yourself for this disappointment, you stop fully receiving what is truly here in this present moment, what is truly reality. And you experience all this joy through loss, through anticipation and worry about the future. And even though you might have love in your life, you're hardwired for looking for the problems, looking for ways to validate that you're going to be abandoned. And again, you can never truly enjoy what you've accomplished and what you achieved and what you received because of um, these subconscious beliefs. And again, you might have all the opportunities that you're supposed to be celebrating, but really, in the back of your mind, you're thinking about failure and how it's all going to go wrong. And slowly over time and more, this fear, this underlying sense of distrust and worry and anxiety steals your life away from you, steals your experiences away from you. And it comes to a point where it might just be unbearable, or to a point where you're just fed up with it. Um, and so the next point I want to make is fear is not the same as discernment. And I think this distinction is super important because sometimes we mistake our fear for our intuition. And we say things like, well, I just have a feeling about it, especially for those of us that are deeply spiritual and connected with our gifts. We might say some things like, "Oh, I know how this is going to end. I have a knowing, I have a feeling something doesn't feel right." And sometimes that can absolutely be your intuition, your gifts, your discernment messages, right? But not everything that's uncomfortable and not everything that feels a certain way is intuition, right? Because sometimes we have to have this lens of awareness where to recognize, is this my intuition or is this part of my conditioning? Because sometimes it could be that. Sometimes it's an old wound. Sometimes, again, it's your nervous system that's been programmed from your past experiences and it's sounding an alarm, right? And so, how do you discern them between what is true and right for you and what you think are nudges and intuitive messages and divine guidance in the right direction, as opposed to something that is subtly fear and doubt and worry in disguise? And so you can begin to ask yourself, and I know I ask myself this as well, is this actually discernment? Or am I thinking and predicting out of fear? Because they feel very different. And part of this process is bringing your energy and awareness back into your body and tuning into your physical vessel, your physical body, and the energy and the frequency that you feel within, because that will be the indicator to you if this truly is discernment and conscious awareness, or is it something deeply rooted in fear? And here's some of the differences that you can tell is fear tends to spiral. It goes from one thing to another worry, maybe to another point. It creates story after story after story. What if this happens, then this? What if they think this? They probably will respond like this. What if this falls apart? Those are all signs that this is actually subconscious beliefs rooted in fear. Whereas discernment doesn't usually need an entire imaginary storyline. Discernment can simply say short, very concise messages like slow down, pay attention. Maybe it's a feeling that something isn't aligned, and it's more quiet and soft and still, and there's waiting in response to it. Whereas with fear, it's very quick, it's urgent. It's again, when you somebody is in fear based, they feel a little bit frantic or like in survival. And fear demands to know the answers now because it's operating out of control and out of fear of not knowing what's coming next, right? Whereas discernment allows flow, allows receivership, allows observation and awareness and choice, um, and patience. And so, again, fear wants to control that future. Discernment helps you actually become aware and respond in a conscious way to what is actually happening in the present. Because our wisdom is meant for us to use in this present moment. It's not for us to ignore reality and what's going on currently. And so, if there are some of those red flags that I just explained to you about fear, then pay attention to them because those are all signs and indicators that you're operating out of that fear based way of thinking. Um, and so, let me see what else. So again, there is a difference between responding wisely to what is and what is happening now instead of constantly preparing yourself out of fear for what might be. Because one, the discernment places you in this present moment of awareness, trust, of acceptance of what is here and now, whereas fear places you in the future or maybe even in the past, thinking about this is what happened before, it's probably going to happen next, right? Whereas, for example, I can give you a great example about this is like if I was speaking to someone who maybe I have a certain past with and we don't really talk as much anymore. And they tell me, you know, would you like to go out for dinner? Oh, and I think to myself, oh gosh, in the past I did this and they were so angry. So if I say this, they'll probably get angry again. And I should just say no because it's not right it doesn't feel right to like hang out with them, right? That is all fear-based thinking. I've projected it into the past and then I projected into the future about how this person might react. Whereas with discernment, I might hold this awareness of, oh, this person is reaching out. I haven't heard from them in a while. Again, this is something in the present that's happening. I'm becoming aware. And then in this moment, I might be present with myself and see what comes up for me in my body, in my awareness, in my heart space when thinking of this person and what they've said to me in this moment. And then in this moment, I move through those things that might be coming up, and then from that rooted place, I feel the messages coming through, how I feel about the situation, what I think is the most best response for me consciously. And then once I'm clear, I respond accordingly and say, thank you so much for the invitation. It doesn't feel aligned right now for me, but maybe next time. Right. And so again, in that second response, I'm rooted in the now the whole majority of the time. Whereas, and that's true discernment. Whereas, and I might even open myself up to receiving from God, like God, um, is if am I meant to like engage with this person again, like, and then you might feel it in your heart or your stomach or whatever it is and receive messages that way. But it's all happening in the now. Whereas with the previous example, all the decisions were coming from comparing it to a past experience or thinking about what might happen in the future. So those are clear indicators of the differences, right? And how you are able to distinguish if you're operating from fear or true discernment. And so, where does faith come in with all of this? This is where um, and I mentioned this in the example, is where my relationship with God has really changed the way I think about all of this. Because in scripture, it talks about renewing our minds. And I don't believe that means like forcing ourselves to think happy thoughts or convincing ourselves that nothing bad is ever going to happen or that we will never go through anything difficult. That's just not real world, right? That's not faith because pain is part of being human. Um, I know some people in the spiritual community want to just highlight ascension and joy and unconditional love and acceptance and this, but as humans, we have this, vast variety and full spectrum and colors of the human experience, right? The good, bad, and the ugly, and everything else in between and beyond and above, right? And so, we need to accept that part of our experience as well, right? Because pain is part of being human. And because loss happens, disappointment can happen, plans change, people might make choices that we cannot control. Um, Things happen, right? That are out of our control. And faith isn't believing that nothing bad will ever happen to me. Faith is knowing that whatever happens, I will not face it and I never will be apart from God. And those two things are completely different, right? And even the word bad has a certain lens and awareness of the situation, right? Whereas the second example, whatever happens, I will not face it apart from God, that is showing this full trust and surrender in whatever situation may come up. I know it's all part of a plan that God has, and God has me in it, through it, with Him, by Him, from Him, in Him, and throughout the whole process, right? Because we don't, in that example, and in my own life now, I don't need to predict every possible outcome in order to feel safe. I don't have to think about how every disaster might turn out, or if there is even going to be a disaster. I don't have to know how something is going to unfold exactly. I can just be truly here and present in this moment, in my body, in this state of awareness, and have peace today, now, in this moment with God, because I can trust that whatever may happen, when tomorrow comes, when the next day comes, when the next minute comes, now, past, present, future, all of it, I know God has been there, will always be there, is here now, and always will be forevermore. And that's why I think one of the things you can reflect on is what is actually true for you right now in this present moment, and stay rooted in this present moment, and know that your point of power is in this present moment, because it is in this present moment where you are conscious and aware of the state and the state of being connected and one with God. And so instead of using your attention and awareness to think about what could happen, what happened 5 years ago, what happened yesterday, what you're afraid of, all these things, what, ask yourself, what is true right now in this present moment, and feel and know and sense and have that faith in your full connection to God, and know that you are safe, you are loved. There's opportunities here, limitless amount of opportunities here in this present moment. And through this lens, you can even ask God for the awareness to see things through God's eyes. Have to, in this moment, you might be experiencing something that you're not sure about, that you don't know um, what it means, and maybe you're having a little trouble and suffering a little bit, and instead of, again, projecting into the past or into the future, you can surrender in this present moment and ask God for the understanding now, in connection with Him. So again, you never lose that point of power by just forcing yourself into the past or the future, which doesn't even exist. You're staying rooted, and it takes us a level of self-discipline, right, and trust, to realize I don't know what the outcome is. I don't know what will happen, but I know that God is with me, and that is enough. I know God fully loves me, and that is enough, right? I know that God is guiding me, and that is enough. And so through this process, what's happening is you're rehearsing peace instead. And this is what begins to change the narrative. This is what begins to change the story of your life, right? Because the first step, again, is awareness, is simply noticing when you start to create scenarios that are about the future or from the past, and um, in that fear-based mentality and thinking. And it's not, again, to judge yourself, it's not to shame yourself, it's just simply to have the awareness and recognize it. And then from there, with conscious choice and intention and attention, ask yourself, is all of that happening right now? And if the answer is no, then come back to the present moment, come back to what is happening, and then ask yourself, what do I actually know to be true now, to help you separate, you know, your current reality and what's actually happening with predictions that may not even be occurring yet. And you can ask yourself, what would it look like if I trusted this process fully now? What would my life look like if I trusted that God has me in this moment now and is leading the way? And notice how those questions aren't like, how can I guarantee this possible outcome, right? It's still a level of surrender and trust and release of control of the outcome because we cannot predict the future, right? um and so releasing that control and move and this allows us to open up and be part of the flow of the divine flow of creation instead of working against it, right? And so allow yourself in that moment to do what needs to be done, whatever comes up that feels conscious and intentional and aligned for you in that present moment, whether it's having that conversation that's hard or allowing yourself to celebrate the opportunity or setting a boundary with somebody. Or it could just be simply waiting for more information, waiting or praying, resting, and just admitting like you don't know what's going to happen next and you don't need to know because you're so rooted and full and whole and loved now unconditionally by God, in God, through God, with God. um and that's good enough, and that itself brings peace. And there's so much freedom in that because then you're no longer a slave to an event that hasn't even happened yet or one that's already happened years ago in the past. You become free of that. You become full and peaceful and joyful and content now. And you simply give yourself the space to be. Um, because again, we're not trying to make ourselves believe that everything will go perfectly as we expect it to. We're teaching ourselves that uncertainty and the unknown does not automatically mean danger. And instead of constantly rehearsing catastrophe, world worst case scenarios, we can begin rehearsing peace by feeling it in our presence now. And what would that feel like to imagine, feeling and meeting yourself fully grounded? And again, not because everything went your way, but because you remained and remembered your connection to yourself, to who you truly are, and to God. And despite the noise that may be going on in the world, things may work out beautifully, things might not, this might happen, that might happen, whatever it might be. But any which way, you trust yourself to respond from a fully whole and aware place when that moment actually happens, because you're not in this fear-based energy of is this going to happen, is that going to happen, and you're actually fully rooted and confident in your trust in God. And so you gain this peace, and with peace you gain clarity to respond in a very grounded, um capable way, because you're fully supported and loved by God. And so that itself also begins to build self trust because and have faith and the conviction. And again, you'll begin to have those experiences under your belt where you are loved and supported by God, and He will guide you every step of the way through whatever may come. And you trust that God will always be there because He is and has been and always will be. And so suddenly, you don't have to live for tomorrow. You don't have to live for the past. You don't have to be constantly thinking about all the different timelines. You just simply have to focus on today. And, I think so much of our healing is this process, right? Learning to stop abandoning ourselves for all these different imagined scenarios. And because, fear is always there, um, we can have a different conversation with ourselves. We can choose to prepare for a different possibility. It doesn't always have to be the worst one, right? And we don't always have to control because life isn't, that's just not how life works, right? It's happening. Life happens here in the present now. And it's not in any of those imagined futures by our fears. Um, and that peace of knowing that whatever may come your way, um, that you got this, right? That God's got you. And, peace isn't knowing that you have to have it all worked out in your brain somehow and you have to be so fully prepared, right? You just have to have hope. You just have to have faith. You have to have surrender. You have to have trust and love in your heart and your soul, and that connection and that remembrance that you are one with God, that you are a child of God, that you are loved and fully supported as you are in this present moment. And that in itself gives hope. That in itself is a celebration. And so from that space, you can receive all that's good. You can allow something beautiful without immediately imagining how you're going to lose it. And you can trust that if tomorrow brings something difficult, you'll meet tomorrow when it becomes today with wisdom, with discernment, with everything that you've learned, and most importantly, with God. So the next time you notice yourself rehearsing the worst case scenario, ask yourself, is this something that's actually happening right now? Or am I experiencing and creating a future um, out of fear? And then if it is, come back to this present moment, come back to your body, come back to yourself, come back to what is true, and come back to God. Because again, you don't have to know what tomorrow holds in order to be at peace today. You only have to remember who will meet you there. So, if this resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What is one fear you are ready to stop rehearsing? And what truth are you choosing to practice instead? Until next time, continue becoming who God created you to be. Thanks so much for watching.